The Old Man and the Locomotive. Background. Some time ago, 2012, one of my customers was a certain railway. This story was told to me by the old man that came in from that railway to run parts and place orders. He didn't like to use the phone, always in person. He even gave me the gate code so I could wander around unsupervised on the weekends, which I did, and it was amazing. Anyways, this man was long retired, mid-80s, but he hated being retired. So he went back to work to do orders and parts. He brought a helper with him for anything heavier, and to yak for as long as you'd let him. He still worked for the railroad for fun. He loved it. It was his life. No kids, never married. I'd say the railway was his wife. Learned many fascinating things from him, but I'll share two here. The first is that they made everything for these trains. I mean it when I say everything. Foundry and lumber mill. From the casting for the locomotives and its internal and external parts and wheels, to the woodworking for the seating, dining cars, plates, forks, knives, front to back, everything. All done in-house. They lived there. Housing and stores and everything. Its own city. Because of this, no one but the yard personnel doing the work, and the operators, really knew much about how anything is made. This is highly relevant. The other is that they never threw any of that stuff away. Even as they developed newer and better models, it's all buried on site at those yards. It's a literal train graveyard and time capsule. Whole locomotives and cars were buried. All the things they used to build them too. Huge pits. Have seen. Not relevant, just interesting. Background. This takes place in his youth, when he was fairly new to the railway and an apprentice, back in the 1940s. He was an apprentice to a man who had been with this railway since the 1800s. He didn't say how old he was at the time, or he did and I don't remember, but here goes. He told me back then he lived at the railway. The railway had housing for the workers, and him and his master were pretty much joined at the hip. He said it's like having your super experienced supervisor, who is also your neighbor, and your houses share common facilities, so you usually eat together too. His master is a few years from retirement at this point. One day, his master is approached by an internal group from the same railway, but from very far away. This company is throwing a large event, and for this event, they have restored a very old unit to show off. The problem is that after restoring the engine, while it's cooling down, it's seized. They have torn it apart twice, can find nothing wrong with it, put it back together, same thing both times while cooling off. Seizes. They are running out of time, hence them tracking down his master. His master is the last employee left they can find that still operated one of these things actively. The locomotive they restored was previously active many years before retirement. It should work fine. They want him to travel out of state to their yard to help him diagnose the thing. He says he already knows the problem. He tells them he can simply give them directions, but they solidly refuse. He must go in person. He asked for $500. Going on this trip is going to put him way behind, and it's a long trip. He wants compensation. They refuse to pay him anything close to it, and he refuses to go. They leave. A couple weeks later, they come back. They've built it a third time, and it still seizes. They're coming up on the date of the event, and they are in panic mode, having heavily advertised the appearance of this locomotive for the event. This time he says $600 and nice accommodations for the trip, all paid. As in, company will foot the bills for nicer food/hotel, and all time on the road is on the clock. They, visiting group, agree without batting an eye this time. This is going to save them from major embarrassment. He makes them take apprentice with for assistance, which they didn't even argue with. He told me they even had a driver to take them, packed and left the same day. Took their regular tool bags and nothing special. He said it took a 2 days ride up, and they stopped at the nicest places they could for meals, stayed in nice hotels. Finally, they make it to the rail yard. Several very anxious people waiting for his input. The locomotive has not been touched since they last put it together. The first thing he does is grab his caliper, walks down both sides of the locomotive, taking measurements and making occasional markings. Then he has them fired up. It, of course, runs fine. He repeats his first steps, then he has them cool it down. Sure enough, as it towards the end cooling down, clink! The sound of the engine seizing. The old man telling this always yells this part. Made me smile. Cue mass panic by local guys. It cannot be rebuilt again in time. Master, on the other hand, walks the same route along the engine, making the third round of measurement and markings. He then requests a sledge from the locals, grabs the sledge, and walks the engine again, this time giving a hard, solid whack in certain marked areas. He does repeat it a few times on each side. Master, try it now. It turns over freely. Master, do that, hammer, on there, markings, every time. Said the other group was a bit shocked, but thrilled, and then requested he write down what he did, like he offered in the first place. The trick here was that in all that all-in-house work they did, with the early units, every engine was unique. They had relatively poor control of metals and casting in general. Differences in the mold and casting created different deformations in the cylinders. Bad metallurgical control back then made large differences in voids and inclusions in the metal. And as it was cooling, the differences in expansion would cause the pistons to catch. You had to know the engines, judge the differences in the casting by the color of the metal, and know where it would lay cold and hot. Then, once you figured out where it was stuck, you had to break it loose, banging on it from the outside at that area. Each engine its own creature. Later in production, the technologies and techniques matured, as did the metallurgy, and it became a non-issue and everyone forgot. So he got his only ever paid vacation, and his master got a nice fat bonus for an hour and a half of work. All because they wouldn't accept him writing down to measure it a few times then beat on it in odd spots, which was the gist of the written instructions he left behind afterwards. No, they said he had to do it himself, and he did, all the way to the bank. I don't really feel like that was malicious compliance, just because that company, in my opinion, did kind of the right thing the second time. Sure, they could have just had him write the instructions down the second time, but when you're that crunched on time and they needed to make sure it worked, then if you have the money to spend, why not just spend the money and make sure it works in time? Angry Karen versus too tired for your BS front desk clerk. Here's how a Karen attempted to forbid me from getting coffee at my job, and how I sent her horribly bleached wig flying. Ah, the joys of customer service. Here's some background. So I work at a club/fitness center that is located within a gated community, basically a breeding ground for Karens. Most people here are very entitled. I also happen to live in this community, but my mom and I rent, and generally keep to ourselves and don't get involved in the drama. When you live in the community, a membership to the club where I work, that has a pool, tennis courts, gym, and dance studio, is included in HOA dues. When you rent, like my mom and I do, the owner's membership is transferred to you. I work front desk/juice bar, which means I greet members, send emails, basically keep the place together. I also prepare all the complimentary snacks and drinks and keep them filled throughout the day. The people are very annoying, but it's good money for a 16-year-old, and my boss/coworkers are great. Now back to Karen. It's about 8 a.m. on a Saturday, which means prime coffee time. My shift starts at 5:30 a.m., so I am pretty tired and ready for a cup. I make all the coffee and complimentary food/drinks. So after I finish setting up, I usually have some. I have explicit permission from my boss to do so. Members of the club have all the complimentary food/drinks they want, so everyone wins. Enter Karen. The giant canvas tote and terribly bleached Bob are telltale. I'm standing at the counter, minding my own business, pouring a cup of coffee. Karen asks in a shrill voice that could possibly break a glass, "Young lady, what do you think you are doing?" Me, surprised, "Getting coffee?" Karen huffs, "You can't do that." Me, too tired for this bull crap, "Why not?" Karen, determined to combat the apparent danger of a minimum wage employee getting coffee, shrieks, "You aren't a member. You can't get coffee if you aren't a member. Until then, no coffee for you." I start to hatch my ever so devious plan. I don't respond to Karen and walk over to the clock-in machine and punch out. Members have a PIN number that they enter into a keypad so we can keep track of the number of people using the facilities. I walk over to the keypad, enter my PIN and my name, and picture pops up on the monitor, indicating that I am indeed a member. I then walk over to the bar, passing Karen, who looks like she's about to spontaneously combust with anger, to pick up my half-full cup of coffee and proceed to fill it from the coffee dispenser. I then walk back over to the clock-in machine, holding my coffee, and punch back in. I sit down at the front desk and start working on entering payments. Karen is still standing by my desk, looking like she's about to have an aneurysm. I just ignore her until she proceeds to leave. The 20 cents I lost from clocking out for 2 minutes was well worth the look of pure horror on Karen's face. Anyone else get the sense the more you read about Karens, the less they feel like real people? Like they don't even feel human. Who has these emotions to get this angry over coffee? I'm telling you, this is why you see no baby Karens. Because they just spawn as full-grown, stick-up-their-ass, middle-aged demons. Alrighty guys, that's gonna wrap it up for today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, consider subscribing. And with that, I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.